it's a huge privilege, a great honor to be introducing Mark Setteducati, who is a co-founder for the Gathering for Gardner and used to be president. He is also a very well-known magician and inventor of games, and any introduction on my part would not do him honors. And he's here to speak about remembering Tom Rodgers and the birth of Gathering for Gardner.
Hello, everybody. I put together some slides and some information, and it caused me, this little talk was actually very good for me because it made me think about the past, which I didn't really think about. And when I went through my pictures and the information that I had, brought back a lot of good memories of my friend Tom Rodgers. There's Tom, and Tom was a big puzzle collector, as everybody knows. In fact, at one time, he had probably one of the 4 biggest puzzle collections in the world, only followed by Edward Horton in England and Jerry Slocum and James Dalgety. So we go back to the London IPP. Everybody from the Gathering may or may not know about the international puzzle parties, but the one in 1989 in London, it was my first puzzle party, and here I am, and that's when I first met Tom. Tom had been going to them and was one of the original members of the IPPs. He was collecting puzzles for many years. So pictured in the center is the one in the suit is Edward Horton, and Edward Horton was a good friend of Tom's and had the biggest collection. He lived in England, outside of London, and had the biggest collection in the world. And James Dalgety, who's sitting next to him on his right, also had a very unusual and large collection. That collection has now been sold to the Millers and Roxanne and the Miller. I think they've done a talk already. And so now let's fast forward to Hendersonville, North Carolina, 1992. So between that time of 1989 and 1992, I had seen Tom at the yearly puzzle, the IPPs, and he met me in New York, and we became close friends. And it was at this trip, at one of the trips, and I would visit him in Atlanta. And it was at one of these trips, that trip in 1992, that we drove to see Martin Gardner, and that's Martin, obviously, in the center, Tom, and the fellow is Harry Yang. The other man is Harry Yang, who we'll talk about. So this was, I think, what gave Tom the seed of the idea to do something and try to get Martin's friends together. Now, at the same time, so this is this trip in Hendersonville, and we were, it was in 1992, and we just went to visit Martin, and there is Tom with Martin's famous files going through the filing cabinets, and we were all very happy to be there. Harry Yang showing some of his impossible bottoms. This is Martin's office. The file cabinets would have been to Martin's right. And that's in the office again, us having a day of just visiting Martin. It was just, Hendersonville was about 2.5-hour drive from Atlanta. And so, and there is Martin and Charlotte. Now, Martin, it was either Martin or Charlotte, I don't remember which one, didn't really like to fly, and they didn't really like to travel. So they would get invited to many conferences and different things, but they never went anywhere. So it was Tom's idea, because Hendersonville was only 2.5 hours away, that maybe he can get Martin to come to Atlanta, because it's not that far, and have some of his friends get together. So the first gathering, January 1993. What I kind of forgot about was that first gathering was really centered around this exhibit, which was a puzzle exhibit that Tom, because Tom was very, very into puzzles and was very active every year at the IPPs, and he had a major puzzle collection. And he organized in Atlanta, because Tom was in Atlanta for many years and he knew many people, and he arranged for this exhibition. And I don't remember if it was, I think the exhibition may have been independent of wanting to get Martin to get together with some of his friends. But this puzzle exhibition in Atlanta was certainly one of the big reasons for the gathering. This was really the birth of the gathering, this exhibition. And the first gathering was held in the Marriott Hotel, which was a little bit down the road where that food court is that we all go to. And this was a gallery, an art gallery. This international gallery was on that mezzanine level where the food court is in the Marriott Hotel. And this was the first gathering for Gardner, and it's centered around this exhibit. And that's the gallery, and those are some of the puzzle people, some of the very well-known puzzle people, many of whom are not alive now, unfortunately. Some really. This was the actual brochure for that puzzle exhibit. And now actually that exhibit was covered on CNN because Tom really put a lot of effort and work into organizing that exhibit. And at the same time, that's when he had Martin, he had me go to the different people in New York, the magician friends, and he asked Gelwin to find the mathematician friends. But here, we'll play this little clip of this exhibition, which is really the beginning of the gathering for Gardner.
3, 4, 8. When we come back to the future of puzzles, they've been around for centuries and seem to be here to stay.
A puzzle is a question, problem, or contrivance designed for testing ingenuity, something which baffles or perplexes.
Puzzles have been around in one form or another since before the time of Christ. Puzzle makers' ability to create new designs seems to renew with each generation. Even now, in the information age, puzzles continue to intrigue and perplex us. David George visited a puzzle exhibit at an Atlanta museum where he learned that puzzles can also help improve our minds.
We started with the squirrels. You jump. So one straight line, like checkers. Yeah. The idea is to make the tan squirrels and the gray squirrels trade places. Child's play, but harder than it looks. So what should I have done? In puzzling, as in anything else, when in doubt, ask an expert. Remember exactly. Nearly 3 dozen puzzle experts came from around the world to help open the puzzle exhibition in Atlanta. Hi, photo text David George from CNN. Puzzles come in all shapes and sizes, with one thing in common: the frustration factor.
She's trying to get all the balls to lay in that box. There's 8 sets of balls that are all connected together in different ways, and they'll lay perfectly flat on the top. And she stacks them the right way.
I even have a cheat sheet.
Like so? Even a cheat sheet might not be enough to solve the intricate wooden puzzles carved by Stewart Coffin. They're works of art on the outside, but inside.
It's really what's inside that's most important, but you don't see that. What you see is the shape and the fancy woods. It's really the insides that make it work.
How hard can a puzzle be?
I tell anyone who buys this puzzle to expect anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 years to solve it that first time.
Many puzzles, like this wire tricycle, are relatively easy. But puzzle maker Rick Irby says he's made one that requires 4.5 quadrillion moves.
And at 1 move per second, non-stop, would take 21 billion years to solve. That's just to take it apart. Double that to put it back.
It was beginning to look like it might take Tom Underwood that long to figure out the squirrels.
I just did this a little while ago.
The earliest puzzles were designed as locks or hiding places. Puzzle's popularity shot up during the Industrial Revolution, and puzzle design has changed over the years, keeping pace with technology. Small wonder, then, that some of today's most intriguing puzzles are found on computer screens.
This particular branch is solvable, right? Yes. Oh, they're all solvable.
Japanese puzzler Nob Yoshigahara designs his puzzles on a computer, sometimes spending as long as 2 months on a single one. Then he forgets how to solve it.
These two are diabolical. 4 different shapes of pineapple. Don't eat. But I cannot solve. Because I designed too many puzzles, about 600. So, and I have very poor memory. I cannot memorize all those things. I saw my cheating sheet to make this here. Very difficult.
Very difficult is the way a century of school children have described this ubiquitous little puzzle. It's called 15s.
The 15s puzzle was actually invented back in the 1880s, and at that time it was as big a craze as the Rubik's Cube was 100 years later.
But today, the Rubik's Cube is considered difficult. 15s is child's play.
And what interests me is to know whether in 100 years' time there'll be somebody else with some new puzzle that we can't even imagine, saying, oh, what did they find difficult about Rubik's Cube? Kids play.
Youngsters and puzzles just seem to go together. Retired Ohio businessman Howard Swift makes puzzles for charity, and he takes his puzzle collection to schools, helping a new generation to get hooked on puzzles.
And so I don't want impossible puzzles. I want a puzzle that kids can work preferably an hour or two and then solve.
Harry Eng, on the other hand, makes what he calls impossible puzzles. Locks, hooks, shoes, huge nuts inside bottles.
Are you giving secrets? Are you telling how you do it?
Very carefully.
Eng is a California school teacher. He says solving puzzles is good for our brains. Most people, Eng claims, use only about 1/7 of their brain power anyway.
The reason you can't use all your brain is man has not discovered the function for the other part of the brain. The brain is waiting for you to discover my use.
Can puzzles help this process of discovery? Puzzlers say yes.
And I think there's jogging is the body, so puzzles is the mind.
Tom Underwood again. Did we tell you he's an officer in the U.S. Army?
Catch that?
I caught that.
Take a second. Yeah.
He took the Army.
David George, CNN, Future Watch.
Now it's your turn.
Puzzles will be on display at the Atlanta International Museum until the 8th of April. Museum spokesmen say they hope to take the exhibit on tour, but details have not yet been worked out.
So here are some photos that I took at that time. Of course, we didn't have digital cameras. The cameras weren't as good, and you didn't take as many pictures. I wish I had more pictures, but this is the exhibition area. And some of the people that were at that first meeting, the puzzle and the gathering. Dick Hess is there. As you can see in the middle, it's Scott Kim, who is doing one of his ambigrams of somebody's name that reads upside down and right side up. And the man to the left is Robert Neal, who is a very famous, very important magic inventor that invents topological, really beautiful ideas. And origami, he does origami, and he's been to more than one gathering. And here we see young Dan Garrett and his wife Carol, along with Scott and Robert Neal. And that's the little plaques of the different people that were exhibiting at the exhibit in Atlanta. Now, Tom, I don't have many pictures of Tom. I wish I had a picture of him here, but Tom always wanted to be out of the spotlight. He didn't like the attention on him. He was the same as Martin. He wanted to just bring these people together, and it was a big effort. And, you know, all the money and everything, Tom funded everything. You know, I don't know whether there was any, I guess the museum maybe had a small budget. I don't know the details of it, but certainly Tom, it was a huge effort to put this together, to organize it. And that's one of the, Tom was very generous and loved to bring people together. And this was the actual, the press release and the press kit from that exhibit. And this was the schedule of events. So it was at this that Tom knew that he was going to bring all these puzzle people in, and he had asked me to bring some of the magician people in. And this was the schedule of the event. So because Tom not only brought these people in and had the exhibit at the same time, but he also had some of us go to schools, local schools, to do talks, and he arranged that in Atlanta. And this was the schedule of the talks. So I went to some school, and Harry Yang and a few others, we went to these different schools during the week that we were there, and gave talks on Harry talked about his impossible bottles, and I talked about magic. So some of the in that little video, you saw Nob Yoshigahara. Nob was a very close friend of Tom's, and this was a publicity photo for the exhibit. And Nob is a legendary puzzle inventor, creator who passed away, I don't know, it could be 20 years ago already. And he was really important in the puzzle. And Tom, of course, everybody knows how much Tom loved Japan. So he would go to Japan fairly often. You would know that because of Tom's beautiful Japanese house. And he and Nob were very close friends. And that's on the left there. The photo on the left is Jerry Slocum, and that's Nob playing with puzzles in Nanko Bordovik's house in Amsterdam. And then on the right is a picture of me with Nob in Tokyo at the toy shows. At that time, I used to go to Tokyo just about every year for either for a IPP or for a puzzle or for the toy business. And these were also Jerry Slocum was at most of the gatherings from early on, the first one. And he, of course, is a very important person in the puzzle world. And James Delgatti, who we mentioned, and you also saw, these were publicity photos for that event. And Rick Irby. I don't know what became of Rick. I don't know. I haven't seen him for many years, and I don't know what happened to him, but I remember being with him at this gathering and also at some other IPPs. We'll talk a little bit about Harry Yang for people that may not know Harry. Harry was very, very close with Tom and was very important in those first gatherings. And Harry was famous for putting things in bottles. As you can see, all of his things, the impossible bottles, and Harry was the king of that. And here's a picture of Harry. Harry would visit Tom and stay for 2 or 3 weeks at his house. This was at his house during that first event when Harry was there, and that's Tom in his kitchen. And these are the kind of bottles that Harry would make. Of course, people in the past have put ships in the bottles, but Harry took it to a whole nother level by putting sneakers and padlocks and cards, and he never cut the bottles. And anybody interested in Harry can look him up a little bit on the internet. There are people that are trying to follow in Harry's footsteps, and it's become an art form of itself, trying to put things in bottles. But nobody can come near what Harry was able to do. He had such patience. And you can see on the bottle with the lock, you would see his trademark knot. Harry had that trademark, but the button knot was a trademark of Harry's. And here was another little video. The exhibition was going to travel, and this was, Tom found a group of people that were going to be involved in traveling it. The exhibition never happened, but it may feature a few more people that were important at the time. So this might be a little longer video. We can skip through.
Is a museum exhibition that celebrates.
We'll give you a little feeling, and we'll go through.
Soon it will bring some of the
you'll see Harry again.
Puzzles.
That's Harry Yang with the hexaflexagon.
To museums across North America. Puzzle Masters was unveiled at the 1993 American Association of Museum show, and the response was overwhelming. Fine art, children's, and science museums, as well as corporate art galleries. And
Jerry Andrus, who we'll talk about in a little while,
San Diego, have signed up for late 1993 and early 1994. From Japan,
Alan
the US, Luxembourg, Italy, Spain, Germany, England, and around the world, these puzzles are the best of the best. And through interactive media, museum visitors can get to know the puzzle makers themselves and learn something about how and why they do what they do.
I think we'll move on. Let's talk about Jerry Andrus. Jerry Andrus was a magician, but not only a magician, but he made these great optical illusions. And he, another thing that Tom would do would bring people like Jerry there. Jerry was a real genius, but he didn't really care that much about money, and he couldn't really afford to come there. So Tom, out of his own pocket, would fly Jerry there and also have his illusions transported into the exhibit room. And Tom had one of these boxes. Gary Fauché had built one of these boxes for Tom, and it was at his Japanese house. Some of you may have seen. This is Jerry Andrus's impossible box illusion. This would be another. This was one of my favorite of all of Jerry Andrus's illusions, the nuts. and he would exhibit this. He would bring the actual one that he made, and this was exhibited at the gatherings that Jerry would come to. And people may have seen this illusion before, but it's really great. And it looks it looks just as good in person as it does on the video. I'm not going to reveal the secret. If one wants to know, you can Google it and you'll find out how it's done. Let's talk about the handouts. Well, the little presents that we give out there. Well, it was a tradition in the IPPs to give handouts. So at the beginning, Tom also said, why don't we do the same thing, have people bring things in exchange, like the puzzle exchange. And this was one of the best ones. Now, Bill Ritchie has a company, his company is called Think Fun now, but before it was called Think Fun, it was called Binary Arts. And this was the dragon that is all over the internet, but that was done specifically as a giveaway for the Gathering for Gardner. And here is Tim Rowett, who is also a very close friend of Tom's, and was at many, just about all the gatherings. Unfortunately, he didn't come to this one because he's in England, but this is the dragon for people that don't know the dragon. You can find it online and make it if you didn't see it or make it. You can also go to Grand Illusions and look at Tim. When you move it, it looks like this was an illusion created by Jerry Andrus, and Bill Ritchie's company was going to produce a line of Jerry's illusions. So anyway, you can see the dragon's head moves. It's a really great illusion. It's one of the best of these kind of illusions ever made. Another very important person that was very close friends of Martin Gardner is Mel Stover, who's pictured here. Many people may not remember Mel, or you may have come across his name in some of Martin Gardner's books. Certainly he's mentioned in Math, Magic, and Mystery. And Mel was really a pretty incredible person. He was a magician, but he was also an expert in bridge and other areas. This was a letter. He corresponded for many years with Martin, and Mel had given me his files, and just to show you how many letters went back and forth, that's on the left. And this was a typical letter that Martin would send to Mel, and they would correspond with these letters about all kinds of topics, puzzles and riddles and bridge and magic, especially magic. Now, everybody probably is familiar with the Vanishing Leprechauns, and the Vanishing Leprechauns are obviously, if you switch the pieces, one of them disappears. The person on the bottom, Pat Lyons, the woman, is the actual artist. She lived in Toronto that drew the original Vanishing Leprechauns. This version here is still probably the best. Mel always said it was the best one ever done. It was drawn by Pat. And Mel lived in Winnipeg, Canada, and that's Mel on the right. Well, Mel, most people don't know that actually Mel invented this version, the beer mugs. Now, typically with these vanishing puzzles, one thing, or these geometric puzzles, one of the images disappear. Usually there's a person. In the case of the leprechauns, one of the leprechauns disappear. But Mel actually in 1956 came up with the idea and made this one where instead of one disappearing, an extra beer, like in this case there's 6 people and 4 beer mugs, and when you switch it, then each one has a beer. So he actually invented this version. So Mel was very, very inventive person with puzzles. He also did the pencils where one of them changed color when you switch it. And he passed away, unfortunately, in 1999, but he was a regular until he died. He was at every one of the gatherings and was a very close friend of Martin's and a very good friend of Tom's. This was another gift from Bill Ritchie. And this is actually, I think, the best leprechaun version of the Vanishing Leprechaun that was ever done, because the theme and everything works so well. On the top, you see the sections come apart, and on the top left, you see the Cheshire Cat. And when you switch it, it all disappears except for the smile. I mean, it's really brilliant. This is like amazing idea. And again, Bill Ritchie has been a major supporter of the gathering from the beginning, and was a good friend of Tom's, and supports to this day. I mean, he's a good contributor. I think the coffee and everything at the gathering was donated by Bill Ritchie, his company Think Fun. So this was in the lobby of the Marriott, and these were some of the notable people that were there at the time. So we put him. Raymond Smulyan was at just, I think, probably every one up until he passed away. Jerry Andrus, who we mentioned, and of course, James Randi. Randi only came to a few. He was at that first one. Bob Page was a very good friend of Mel Stover's, and he was a magician and actually came up with some really nice ideas. With those binary cards, the age cards, he did a triangular version, which was really interesting. And the other man, Oscar Weigel, was a very long-time friend. He lived in New York, and I knew him from the Magic Table in New York, and he was a good friend of Bill Ritchie's. Here's another, of Martin's, an old-time friend of Martin Gardner's. This is the same area, but in a different view, and this is the Marriott Hotel where we gathered. And that's Oscar Weigel and Martin. And Oscar was good friends with Paul Curry, who invented the great trick out of this world, and did writing, and I think he worked in publishing in New York, and they were very close friends, Martin, and this was at that first gathering. So he was one of the people that I knew from New York that we invited for this gathering. And of course, Randy was there, and the person, that's Howard Schwartzman, who some people may remember. He passed away a few years ago also. He was a great card magician and was a very important magician in the New York magic scene for many years in the early years. Very innovative and great magician who also performed at many of the gatherings and was a very good friend of Randy's and the New York Magic Group. There's Martin playing with some of the little stuff over there. This was the awards dinner. We won't play the whole thing, but I'll just, again, unfortunately, it's a very bad video, but this took place on Friday, January 15th, 1993. And this was the beginning, and there was a show, and at the end, Tom was given an award, CoM puzzle. And the person speaking is Jay Marshall, who's also legendary in the magic world.
His name is Neal CoM. Neal CoM will present a brand new secret box.
You can see Raymond Smulyan on the left there, a little standing over there, and Mel Stover's head is in the center in front of Jay. He would always sit in the front seat. And that's CoM, who's a legendary puzzle maker, Japanese puzzle maker. And he made a special puzzle for Tom. We'll skip ahead a little bit because it'll take a long time, but he's presenting a puzzle that he created for Tom as a gift for putting this all together. It was like, I think, a hand grenade that explodes and opens. So. And there's Tom with his award. He didn't expect it. He didn't know that some of the other people that were involved in it organized this and made a gift for him.
But it can be dangerous.
You can hear Nob in the background translating.
And you pull and pull the pin and press, please. And he. He doesn't want to die, so
I think it's going to explode. We can go ahead a little bit, but
yeah, yeah. But please,
that's Tom's little laugh, which I miss very much.
Explode.
All right. Anyway, that event was originally only meant to be a one-time event. Nobody was thinking that it would go again, but people started to ask Tom, why don't we do that again? Obviously, the big puzzle exhibit wouldn't happen, but to get Martin's friends together and do that again. And it took 2 years before Tom decided to do it again and arranged for another meeting. And here we are in we fast forward to Norman, Oklahoma, 2008. And this was just a little visiting Martin at his home in, this was in Norman, Oklahoma. And Tom kept in touch with Martin. And the person on the left is Jerry Farrell. And the person sitting down, for people that don't know, is Scott Morris. So we'll talk a little bit about some of these. Scott was a good friend of Martin's and wrote, there's let's see, I thought I had a picture of, oh, okay, there it is. So Scott Morris did a column similar to Martin's in Omni magazine, where he had a games column, which people, if they don't know about it, you may want to look up or try to find some of the past issues of Omni magazine and Scott's column. And Scott is still living, but he doesn't travel. He's in San Diego, and he was also would communicate very often with Tom. Now, Jerry Farrell, for people that don't know, Jerry was very, very good friends with Tom, and his wife Karen was one of the original people that would do all the organizing, similar to what Katie does now. That's what Karen Farrell would do. And Jerry is a math professor, but a magician, and he created the best crossword puzzle ever, which was, he predicted the presidential election between Bill Clinton and Bob Dole. And for people that don't know what that solution is, or the presidential election, you may want to think about how could the newspaper run and correctly predict the winner of the election when the results weren't published yet. I'm not going to give away the secret because it's easy to find on the internet, and we're really talking about Tom, but these were some of Tom's friends and some of the original people in the puzzle party. And these are some of the people that are slowly, in some ways, maybe being, I don't want to say forgotten, but I think they should be noted and acknowledged. And so we realize some of the people that have been there in the past that Tom brought together, and some of Tom's close friends. So if anybody is interested in this, you want to Google the presidential election crossword puzzle and Jerry Farrell. So this was at that meeting, that little day in Oklahoma in 2008. Martin, again, this is in his room, and then there was a shared, this is the assisted living facility. That was his private room, and then there was another area where there was a common area. There's Tom going through the files again. We like to go through Martin's files. There was always something interesting to find and lots of questions. This was I guess we had a little dinner later or whatever, but Leonard Green actually was there also, and Leonard and Tom were very good friends. Leonard would come and stay with Tom for like 2 weeks. At also Tom would fund Leonard's trip over, and there was Jerry Farrell taping up Leonard, and we're doing a little show for Martin. There's Martin playing with one of a little puzzle that Leonard brought. And Scott Morris, this is in Oklahoma. There's Jim Gardner and Jerry. Well, now we'll just show some pictures from the G4, G6, some memories of the past. Some of the other people, that's Tom Rodgers' daughter on the right. No, that's Kate Jones. Wait a minute, my eyes are no good. That's Kate Jones, and on the left is Solomon Golem, who was also a regular, a mathematician. I think a lot of you know or probably have met Solomon. And there is Tom at one of the dinners. Again, he would be very low key, and during the gathering, he was always very busy because there was many things to do. And one of the good things about the gathering today is it's much more organized. Back then, it was a little bit more informal and not really put together, but it's really gotten to be really tight and really well run, which Tom would be really happy about. Because at that time, the only person funding the gathering was Tom, and every gathering he would actually lose quite a bit of money, sometimes up to $10,000, because he would have to guarantee that hotel with his own credit card, which means, like risking $25,000. I mean, it was a big thing. You don't realize how much, risk Tom took to keep this thing going, because there was no foundation at that point in these early years. there was nobody funding or giving money. There was some donations he would ask around, and some different people like Bill Ritchie and a few other people would contribute maybe, something to the gathering. But the whole thing was on his shoulders, and he really carried this thing and made it happen and made it grow. Here's Tom again with Scott Kim. This is 2004. And Scott again doing his ambigrams, amazing ambigrams. Scott Morris and Tom. And at this point, I think we may have been at the Ritz. I don't remember, but the first few were at the Marriott, and we may have had it at another one of the hotels. They were always in that Peachtree area in downtown Atlanta. And we would have dinners in different locations. So to try to break it up. So sometimes, and one of the gatherings we had at one of the offsite events was at the Atlanta Aquarium. So Tom would it was a huge job to organize all this, and Tom was in Atlanta, and it would be like after one of the gatherings, the next one wasn't going to be for 2 years, so there'd be kind of a break. But then after a year went by and we only had a year or 8 months left to go, Tom would start to think, hey, we better, start to figure this thing out. So he'd be calling me and the other people that were helping, Jerry Farrell and some of the other people that were trying to organize. Well, he would organize the hotel, but think about where they can have the dinner or the magic shows and other off-site events, and of course at his house. So these were some of the early pictures. There's Jay Marshall again sitting there, and that was at one of the dinners. I don't know if that was, again, I don't know if it was at the Ritz, but there's Tom. We're at G4, G8, March 2008. Well, some of you may have come across a fun character, Al Seckel. So I bring Al up because he was actually recently in the news. Al was by all accounts a con man. He was very dishonest because he would borrow puzzles from people and he would not return them, and he did some very not so good things. But the reason why I bring Al up is because it's a kind of a funny story, but it shows a big part of Tom's personality. Al did this tribute to Jerry Andrus, who passed away the year before the gathering. And it was actually a wonderful tribute. And it was kind of funny because Jerry knew that Al was a crook, and really, whenever you mentioned Al's name, Jerry would cringe a little bit and really didn't have anything good to say. And Jerry was like the kindest person that never told a lie and everything, but yet he really irked, Al really irked Jerry. But the funny part was that Al wrote a letter at some point. He started to come, I don't know if this was, the one in 2004 may have been his first one. I don't remember which was his first gathering, but he had heard about the gathering for Gardner, and he wrote Tom a letter, a big letter trying to get invited, and he got invited, but Al offered to do the exhibition room. Now, at that point, Tom didn't know that Al was a bit of a con man, and he came and he did a really great exhibit room, and including Jerry Andrus and other people that he got, other artists that he knew, optical illusion artists, and it was a really phenomenal exhibit. What Tom didn't know is that, of course, everybody at the beginning, we were all paying our way. I mean, everybody that went paid, all the magicians that performed did it voluntarily because there was no budget. It was just up to Tom and all of us to contribute. So we all came and we contributed what we could. And so Tom, I guess Tom made the reservation for Al's room or whatever. Anyway, Al ended up bouncing, his check bounced like a big rubber ball, and Tom, he was a very, very sharp guy. You don't want to cross Tom. Tom was one of the most generous people you'll ever meet in your life. He had a big heart of gold, but don't cross him because he was also one of the sharpest people and incredible businessmen you would ever meet. And so Tom managed to get Al eventually to cover the check by, anyway, that's a different, we'll go on. But the reason why I bring him up is that anybody else would have said, well, Al you know, you don't come here anymore. You know, he would have, but Tom, because he felt like Al had something to contribute, invited him. And Tom's idea was that whenever anybody came, if they had, first of all, they should come if they had something to contribute. And Al did recommend some very interesting people that came. I mean, Nathan Myhrvold was a recommendation of Al's, and some other people. I think Marvin Minsky came one time because of Al. So despite the fact that Tom knew that there's Al, and we were on our way to a big, another kind of conference that was on Staten Island a number of years ago. And Tom would still talk to, I mean, anybody else would, after somebody tried to screw you, you would never want to talk to them or not have anything to do with them. But because Al saw something, Tom saw something in Al that he had something to contribute, and he knew he wasn't going to take anything from him. And he knew he wasn't, you know, Al was not going to be able to take advantage of him anymore. So he kept inviting him, and Tom always felt that anybody that came to the gathering, once you came in the door, you forget about all kinds of politics, forget about and we come together to celebrate what we all are interested in, the illusions, the puzzles, the magic, the math, and all these different topics. And that's how Tom was, very open and generous and that way. And there's Tom, a picture later on at one of the gatherings. And I'll stop the talk and we can have some questions after this. This is a picture of Tom, and this represents him to me. He was always very playful. This is in my office in New York at one of his visits when he came, and he was always his mind was always very curious, and he was always playful, and he loved solving puzzles, and he loved meeting interesting people. Many times I'd be on the phone with him and I'd say, oh, I just met somebody, I was with so-and-so, and I met this really interesting person. And Tom would always just say, oh, bring him to the gathering, get him to the gathering. I wasn't even thinking of that. I would just say, you know, I would talk about somebody that I just met, had lunch with, or something. Get him to the gathering, get him to the gathering, you know. And that's how Tom was, very playful, generous, and amazing person. And I really miss Tom, and I'm really happy that the gathering is still going on, because when he passed away, that was 10 years ago in 2012, Tom was fighting cancer. He had been fighting it for several months, and people don't realize, I mean, the gathering was coming up, and we didn't think he was going to make the gathering. It was like already in January, and he really took a turn downhill, and he kind of made a comeback, and somehow the gathering kept him going until he managed to survive till the gathering. And he was actually, when that gathering was happening, he was in his house really on his deathbed and really not doing well at all, but still managing it. And he was seeing a few people in private to say goodbye in the house. And he managed to keep that, especially at the event at his house, because everybody was at the house having a party outside. But meanwhile, Tom was really on his last breath inside, and he had a board of directors meeting. I had a meeting with several of us, including Nancy and some of the other people there, to try to. One thing that was really important for Tom is that this gathering would keep going, and we didn't know how this would happen, and he was really worried because he knew that we would need financing. He knew that it needed a lot of organizing, and he knew the amount of work that he was doing, and so it was really, really important. And he asked me personally to say, Mark, can you please make sure this thing keeps going? So for me, it's really a personal relief, and I'm really happy to see how well the gathering has not only continued, but to manage to even get stronger and more well organized, because it was a promise that I made to my friend. And I feel like I'm really happy that everybody involved, CoM and everybody, that's Nancy and all the people that have Katie and everybody else. I don't want to miss anybody's name, but you know who you are. You really have done an amazing job keeping this together and making it go on. And it's really Tom's legacy. And that's it for the little slideshow.
Well, this was a completely overwhelming talk with all the wealth, and it was, yeah. People throughout the talk have left many comments in the chat, in praise and in recognition of some of the people who were present there. John Miller asks, Mark, were there any computer programs displayed at the Atlanta International Museum gathering in 1993?
I think there was. I don't remember, but they did talk about it in the CNN piece. They did show that little computer thing, but I don't really remember specifically, because at that time I really wasn't interested in the computers. You know, another person that was very important was Ken Knowlton. I think maybe in the background in one of the pictures, one of his pictures was there, but he was early on at the gathering, and he's been a very important part of it, and also was a very close friend of Martin Gardner's. That he corresponded with him often, and also Scott Morris knows of Ken. I hope I didn't leave any. You know, there were so many important people at that beginning that were forgotten, but the problem was that at that time we only used film. It's not like a digital camera where now we take 1,000 pictures, but at that time you had a roll with 36 pictures. You'd be careful with your pictures. I wish I took more pictures, but who knew? I mean, at that time, I would never know, you know, that later that they would be valuable, or that we'd want to look at them. So I didn't, the reason why I picked some of these people were because these were pictures that I had.
So another question, Jeff Scallon asked if Harry Ang continued to attend the gathering, and for how many years?
Well, unfortunately, I guess he was only at 2 because he passed away in the summer of 1996. So he wasn't around for very long. And it's a shame, but he did he did visit Tom quite often, and they talked a lot. And Tom actually had quite a few of Harry's bottles, because we would see each other. Harry would go to some of the IPPs, and we would, and Harry was actually at one of the IPPs in Japan, I think, with Tom and myself.
I can but say again, personally, how amazed I am by this recap, and it was a great pleasure to see this, and everyone in the chat that seems to be in unison. So thank you so much, Mark, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.